Welcome. On this episode, we speak with our dear friend Vera Espindola. Vera is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Azahar Coffee and sits on the board of the Specialty Coffee Association. Vera's research across the coffee industry has recently been a part of her work and involvement in the Sustainable Coffee Buyer's Guide. Join us as we discuss how coffee producers and coffee origins can be impacted through price and domestic consumption. Vera, welcome to our podcast. We're so excited and happy to have you here. How are you?
Good. I'm doing good. I have some nice coffee next to me, and I'm very happy to be here with you.
Nice. Thank you for joining us. Maybe if we can just kind of get things going, if you could tell us a little bit about just who you are and your work in coffee, specifically, with Azahar and the SCA.
Yeah.
I know you have done a lot of research, and that is very interesting to me and also some of our listeners. So if you can give us maybe like a brief overview of who Vera is, that'd be nice.
Yeah, of course. I'm Vera. I live in Mexico City. I love mezcal. I love coffee. I love food. So if I ever visit you in your city, or if you want to visit me, please connect with me. I can give you definitely some recommendations. But I'm also a development economist. I've been working in coffee for almost 15 years. I've worked primarily on the sustainability angle and much more the angle of the production side on how can we actually provide better values for producers. And this came primarily from a study that I did with Ana Café, where the results of the value chain analysis was that 5% or between 5 and 8% of the final consumer price went back to the producer, and it triggered me of thinking, this should be more. This can be more, And worked for UTZ for many years when it was still a small organization, and went back to Mexico to work for the Mexican government as a advisor to their plan of the National Coffee Plan. Was fantastic. It was very fantastic to understand how to work at a government level. Not easy. It's 24/7. It's a headache. And then I got to know. I did some research in between the time that I left. I did a study on domestic consumption, especially coffee, and in producing countries. And I also did some other research work for different agencies. And I ended up getting to work also for Azahar on a project that's called a Sustainable Coffee Buyer's Guide, which I actually very much love to do, because part of that work was basically doing a cost of production study, which brings me back to how I got into coffee. So for me, it was also a personal trip of going back where I began and understanding where we are now. So yeah, I enjoyed that. So
nice.
And now I'm still at Azahar. And yeah, the link to the SCA, sorry. The link to the SCA is that I started to work as a volunteer for the SCA at the Sustainability Council in 2015. And then I was nominated to get on the board. And this is my second cycle of the board, the third year.
That's awesome. Super cool. So, Vera, do you want to? So we have mainly two topics we want to touch, but let's start with the first one, which is a very intriguing one. It's about local consumption of coffee in a producing country. So you live in Mexico. How does it look in Mexico? What's the opportunities? What's the background? What's the context?
Yeah. So my family is Mexican, and I've always been. I grew up partly in the Netherlands, and I always come to Mexico. And we didn't have that much family in Mexico City. My family's from Oaxaca, from El Estado, so that's where I spend most time. And getting to know the city in itself, which came later, I was first blown away about the food options, of course. And then later on, when I started to work in coffee, I was blown away by, these small little coffee shops. And as time passed, this became much more of the coffee shop that we know now. And I came to live here in 2016, and I was like, this is big. This is something that I did not expect to see, because my experience was mostly Guatemala City, Lima, Bogota, which had a certain level of coffee shop. But there were so many here, And granted, they're small. They have a couple of tables and they have their their serving area, but there were many of them, and the coffee was amazing. Fast forward to now, I think it has grown tremendously. There's a lot of opportunity for producers here, which also need to be tapped on more. But I've seen how much work these coffee shops have done to elevate that to a different level. And that's not necessarily by a set up program by a government, for example. That's basically also, opportunities they have seen among themselves and supporting and tapping in on other opportunities, for example, in Guatemala, what they see in Colombia, what they see when they go to the SEA when they can. But that has been very beautiful to see how that has developed over the years.
So historically, the coffee is an export product, and now suddenly we talk about internal consumption at the origin country. Do you think it's a better economic opportunity, or what is the intrinsics to that?
Yeah, I think we very much come from indeed having this being one of the products that comes from the colonial era. So it came to our country set up on plantations, bringing slaves in, and then being exported. It's as similar as what happened in the U.S. with sugar and cotton and everything. When you have that knowledge, we have that understanding how it was set up, it was there that I also thought, okay, that's an opportunity. Export will also be an opportunity, with the focus on having that creating a value in the country itself is of humongous importance, because what is that value? What is that opportunity, and what are the benefits for somebody to sell on the national market? And I think that the benefit is very much present, and not necessarily monetary value, but also in a added values as having a better understanding what you can sell, a better understanding of your own product, because the interaction with the person that's buying your coffee from is completely different. And also it's simply knowing that the market in your country is growing and changing, and having an understanding that people in your own country are enjoying and also paying really good prices for your coffee. That is a motivating factor for many.
It's more the immediate communication, interaction, understanding what the market wants, understanding where the product is coming from, and the more intimate experience in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think the language has to do with that, because it's not the same if a green coffee buyer from the US who speaks maybe a bit of Spanish, but it's not a similar interaction. It's at the same time, it's still somebody, it's visiting your farm from far. But having somebody that comes from the same areas, or not the same area, but I said the same country, speaks the same language, has the same culture exchanges, eats the same food as you. It's very important, that aspect of knowing, oh, he gets me. We can, or at least we can get each other. We understand each other. And when the relationship evolves and you get into, oh, he says that my coffee is this, this, and this, and that he enjoyed it. Oh, that's good to hear. Okay, what else can I learn from this relationship? And I think that's there where a business relationship can evolve, but it's quicker, it's easier. That is something what I heard from both angles. So I heard it from Green Coffee Buyers here, and I heard it from the producers themselves, that they say, no, it's easier, the communication makes it worthwhile. And also when they have issues, it's easier for them. The hurdle is less high to connect with them and say, hey, I'm in a tight spot. Can you prepay that coffee that you were looking for? Very easily. And the transactions in every single level are easier. That I think is also very important. It's not perfect. It's easier. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so one thing that I found interesting that you mentioned to us before was that sometimes in producing countries, producers will actually get paid more for their coffee than they would exporting it. Can you tell me a little bit about how that even works out to be? Naturally I wouldn't think that's possible, but it is.
Well, it was I think when I was triggered to start writing about it was because that actually happened to a green coffee buyer,
Mm.
where he basically said to me, "Well, great trip, but I could not buy the coffee. He's selling it off to on the national market." And I was like, "Okay." We started talking about it, and I was like, "Well, that's a much better price what he can get here, um, versus there, and the transactions are also less." How does it work? Um, how do you get there? That's what also people have asked me.
Mm.
I'm not really. I don't really have the formula. I can only list the things that I've seen, I've heard from people, and that's basically the relationship of these green coffee buyers and the producers have to be involving. Mexico City has been a country that has been looking for better coffees to serve, especially coffee shops. Um, and that comes with an organic growth of price, which is part of to do, of course, if the offer is not that much and price maybe go up. But even that, I don't think that represent the full explanation of it. They're simply green coffee buyers saying to me, if the quality of the coffee is in this area of cupping results and also this profile, I'm willing to pay for that, and I can pay that without blinking. So if that's the case, um, I mean, why not? I haven't heard that many people um, complaining in a sense. I mean, the effect on the final price for the consumer, you could see that it has been going slightly up, but it's also not that it's impossible to pay. So it's not necessarily that it goes all the way to the effects to the cup of the coffee. I think it has been generally, specifically in Mexico, where we did see an average specialty coffee price higher on the national market than when exporting. Colombia, it was kind of similar. And this was a study on using numbers in 2000, harvest 2018, beginning 2019. And the study I finished around October 2019. So yeah, I think it has very much to do with just this organic growth of demand of specialty coffee. And it's for a producer, I think, a good opportunity to have another option for them, right?
Sure, and that I feel like it took a long time to educate customers in the US and in other countries, consuming countries, to higher prices, to quality standards, to whatever, all those things which come with specialty coffee, and it takes the same time at origin countries. So there's no difference in my opinion. So that what you just said is like, okay, in Mexico City's prices are rising because more and more people get it, more and more people understand specialty coffee and are willing to pay that price because they learned what's the difference and what is what. I guess that's part of that dynamic.
And of course we are. I mean, very much aware that there is still a very much learning curve to go for. But it's great to oversee that take off in a very active manner for over the last 5 years.
So I don't know what it's like in Mexico. Maybe you can explain that a little bit better. But for example, in Colombia, the generation. So I would say in Latin America, the growth for consumption is growing rapidly. I mean, it's growing really fast, and I know, like, just from my experience in Colombia, a younger generation is leading that growth in a way. Is that the same for your experience in Guatemala, Mexico City? Like, who is leading that trend to be more, I guess, conscious of the coffees they're drinking, coffees they're buying in Mexico internally? Who would be the group leading that?
Definitely. It is that big younger group, if you want, willing to say it. But there's a difference, right? There's a difference between consuming coffee and consuming specialty coffee. So just to clear that, in many of our cultures, and I even expanded to Mesoamerica, that I've been part of a group of professionals that work on internal consumption for producing countries of Mesoamerica, that was funded by the ICO. And we among ourselves have seen, of course, these changes. And it's fantastic to talk about specialty coffee because that's where our love is. But we realize very much that there is the larger portion is still, of course, just drinking coffee. And it comes from this is not new. This comes from the end of 1800s, where we discovered the first cafes in Mexico City. If it was around that time. So it's not new. It's simply the specialty coffee piece is the new piece of drinking coffee. And it's there where specifically the younger generation say 40 between 18 and 40 is the one, and depends on how your purchase power lies. If you're younger, maybe you just go once. If you're old, you go several times drinking that. It depends on income. But there's definitely a wide group of people that just drink coffee because it's just part of our breakfast, or it's part of our afternoon habit. And that's a big chunk of people that push also that. And while we have better coffee served everywhere, you could see that it will also push that older generation also to drink differently. So for Colombia, I know that their consumption is around 1.8. I would assume now 1.9 kilos per capita. Mexico, in the study, the latest study that we did was 8.5. Mm-hmm. But take for example, Costa Rica has almost 4.9.
Oh wow!
Oh jeez.
Yeah.
La Dominicana is 4 kilos, and then you have, for example, a country like El Salvador that is already doing 3.6 or 7 even. So it is already going. It's the piece of the specialty coffee piece that is taking more. I would definitely say it's like the ambassador of coffee in a sense. It's the one that shows off in a sense.
One thing I'm really curious on, and you probably, I don't think there is an answer to this, but I'm curious to know your thoughts, is so internal consumption, you roast in origin, value is added in origin, value stays in origin, and whether it's kept with the producer or, it's still along the internal origin supply chain. But I want, what do you think the trend or like the future trend would be exporting roasted in origin coffee? Obviously there's its limitations or its barriers of shipping and logistics and whatnot and freshness. But I'm seeing a lot of brands in Latin America do that now. And I am a fan of it. I support it. I'm curious to know though, I want to know what the longevity is going to be. Are people going to accept it? I don't know. What do you think?
I think the question is maybe, can be posed differently in the sense of let's take the example of the US, to not get into the EU regulations of importing roasting coffee, because that's the reason why it's not done more. So EU has a regulation that the tariff of roasted coffee, of importing roasting coffee, is around 40%. So whoever will do that, needs to have a very good funder somewhere in order to do so, which has happened, in Africa, exporting roasting coffee to Germany or whoever of those countries have to deal with that.
Yeah.
But let's say, for example, the US. I think that from a freshness perspective, it can be managed. I do think that I don't think that issue of, let's say, 10 years ago is of relevance anymore, simply because of the development that has been reached and achieved with packaging. I think it's more of, is there appetite for that business model in the US? I work at Azahar. We have our clients. Do we really want to compete at that level? Is that where you want to go for as an exporter? That's a question. If for a producer or cooperative, that's of interest, you have to have a very good setup in order to get there. I would love to see that more. But I also think there is a valid question in saying, how well do you know the consumer there? how well do you know the profiles that are used to drinking and to roasting and then to drinking it. You have to have that well set up, because the way how coffee, I usually know coffee from especially coffee shops, visiting them in the US, the roast profile is sometimes slightly higher, or the majority of it is higher than here.
Mm-hmm.
Here we don't roast it that much, that dark. I think that's interesting to see. Everybody has his own preference. I think the palates of our countries are not the same. Do you know what I mean? So if I would serve Norbert something, it's based on my palate experience and what I enjoy, and you can like it for a day, but do you like it for 2 days? Do you like it to drink it out? I don't know. I think I would love to see that being explored more. I know it is challenging, and I hope it will be embraced rather than to seen as a competition, by roasters.
Yeah, I think that leads back to that what you just initially said. Hey, that the local market is a little bit easier to serve because the customer and the producer are closer together, so they can exchange information easier. They understand each other on the cultural level easier, and that would need to be learned and to be understood. And that's what I mean. Just look at Coke. I mean, Coke is not the same everywhere on Earth. It has a little bit of different, sugar content, a little bit of different formulation, and that's a fairly simple product in general. Coffee is so much more complex, so you really want to understand what the customer wants, and even within our market. So here in Sacramento, we have different coffee roasters with different profiles, catering to different sub-markets. So to really dial it in for specific customers. But it's it's a very interesting point to bring those closer together, and I think it's one of the reasons why we're sitting here, because Cropster was founded for that reason, to supply and provide information to players in the coffee supply chain. So to have technology as one of the solutions, as part of that communication scenario, to bring the partners closer together.
And I think the reason why people explore it is because they want to capture more value for the product, and that's a very valid reason. Is that the way to go? I don't know. Maybe for some, indeed, it depends on where you're coming from. It depends what kind of market structure you have around you, right? Would it be my first bet for maybe a cooperative or a producer that's a bit larger that has volume? I don't know. Maybe tap first in on your domestic market, on the city nearby and on the next city nearby, because at the end of the day, if you want more value for your product and you think by tapping in on more pieces of the supply chain, that's a very complex one to do. I've seen a model where they actually have focused more on getting a warehouse in US where they can actually fly in their coffee to from the association, from the group, and from there on make sure that they can tap on that value until there, and then distribute in the US. I think that is a valid model as well. I would say if we would be more transparent in the supply chain on why are we charging this XYZ in the next steps of the supply chain, maybe people would then be able to say, okay, how do we get there that I can get more value for my product and you do not lose your value, which you're getting right now? That's a different talk. Yeah.
Like what you've heard so far? This podcast is brought to you by Cropster, a software solution that connects coffee professionals from origin to roasteries and cafes around the world. Whether you produce, trade, roast, or brew coffee, Cropster products will help your business take that next step. And honestly, I think this segues nicely into, though, if you could maybe tell us a little about the Sustainable Coffee Buyer's Guide, right? That's the correct name, yeah. Because I think that poses kind of, talks about what you were just touching on, is where the green buying process can improve, not only on the sustainability on our side, but on the producer side as well. And, I would love to hear more about that as well. the work there?
The vision behind the guide came from a period not long ago, 2018, when prices dropped, and prices dropped that far that we basically all just were looking at a really bad, shitty movie, and it just went down below the dollar. And everybody, I think, knew what was happening. But again, we were just sitting there and watching it happen. The dependency of something which is called price, that is so untouchable by a producer, blows my mind. It is they have no control sometimes over it for the majority of the producers, and it's there where you say, okay, how can they have more influence on that part that is so important for the business side of coffee, even for business side of the business case for producing coffee. We decided to go for a theory of the cost of production is an indicator for price, at least for market price. We have to have a better understanding of it. We know that every region has a different way of producing coffee. We know that also these differences sometimes are small, sometimes they're bigger in a country, let alone between countries itself. And we wanted to say, well, we want to come up with certain prices, price references that gives us an understanding what that means for the income of a producer. Because I think we sometimes know that if you pay below the dollar, around the dollar, that's bad news for producer. But we do not know what that really means because, hey, we're not there, we don't live there, and that's not our income, So we decided to do a cost of production study in Colombia in 4 regions, in Nariño, Huila, Tolima, and Quindío, to understand the differences in producing coffee. And then with that, what we did is had 3 references, what we call this, the poverty line, the minimum wage, and the prosperous income. And one of the important aspects within that is, okay, so if we know that we have this price range or this price, this will fall in line with poverty line. If we have this price, this will fall with minimum wage. And we have this one, this will lead to prosperous income. That's the whole setup behind it. And what came out of that is that, yes, it confirms these producing regions differ among themselves in terms of how much it costs to produce coffee, which has to do with different factors around their communities. For example, a Tolima has a much more of a different cost of production number than a Huila or Nariño, simply because this is particular indigenous communities. They farm differently. They have less inputs because they very much believe in respecting the nature and not influencing that much. So inputs will be much lower. And so all those reasons are valid for them. It's not that we want to influence them. It's mostly of what will then mean a certain price to be poverty line, be minimum wage. And what we, of course, want is that we lead it up to prosperous income or more.
So this guide is geared towards coffee roasters and direct coffee buyers, right?
Yeah.
How will that translate then to the end consumer?
Yeah, great question. What we're envisioning for now, and we just finished the research for 2019 and 2020. So the pilot version that we made was 2018. So now we have 3 years of cost of production. I, as a data geek, are pretty geeked out about that because having 3 years cost of production numbers is amazing to see the development for each of these farmers. How do we reach out to the producer to the consumer? We see that as having a platform visible where we can basically, when you're drinking your coffee, you click in the data that is mentioned to you on the package or on the cup that indicates the amount that the producer received for that coffee. And when you click it into this platform, you automatically get informed this is a for example, prosperous income price coffee. So this is for in his community. That's a good price to receive.
So you're basically aiming for total transparency.
Yes.
Price transparency.
I think consumers are also looking for that, and some aren't. It really depends. But I do think we need to push for that. I mean, Azahar, we have coffee shops in Bogota. We also share that price of the day, what a producer has been receiving. And for Colombian consumers, that has been a lot of the questions. And talking to baristas that work at the shops, they told me, yeah, sometimes a lot of the consumers what does that mean for them? Because they know what it means for them as I live in Bogota, but what does that mean for them? And that's a cool thing, again, about consuming coffee in these producing countries, because you know what that means. You know what 100 pesos, what you can do for 100 pesos, how many tacos you can buy for it, or you know what you cannot buy for it, right? You know what the distance is to get there. You know, in a certain sense, what that means, and you can interpret it if it's good or bad. And I think that is also what we're very looking forward to expand that also to the shops. And mind you, our intention, and we love to see this becoming not a tool of a company. We love this becoming a tool for the sector, for the sector, meaning for producer to consumer, where and what we have done so far is also to give back the data to the producer. Coming from an NGO place, I've also seen many great efforts done with data, but sometimes we just skip the producer and don't give them back the data. The data is theirs. They can actually use the data for their own decision making. And it's merely that they sometimes don't receive it back. So we have made an effort to go back to the producer and say, here you are, these are your numbers. Let me explain a bit what I've seen here. And it goes back to that piece of, this is not just a number. This is a household. This is a farm. This is Blanquita that is trying to get going with her farm and wanting to get better at what she's doing. She needs to have this insight in order for her to continue doing this. And I think we often think they will not understand, or think that it's just a number for them. No, they get it. It's simply a way on how you communicate that back to them.
It has to do with empowering the farmer in a certain sense. It has to do with giving them tools for negotiation, and potentially also understanding a little bit their financial situation in a very broad sense. Did you get those? Did you get feedback on that? So when you talk to farmers and let them know, hey, you're selling your coffee for X, but you should ask for Y. Is this something which resonates with them? Do they feel more empowered asking for more, or what's the feeling? What's coming out of it?
I think that what I very much enjoy we had this fantastic conversation with a group of them last month, and I think that what I took out from them was what they said. He said, sometimes people think, or you guys think, that we always want a better price. Yes, we want that. What we want actually is like, can you just not tell me how much you want from me of my coffee, and I can make that happen? It's not necessarily, the price is not the only variable for them that is key. The key thing is also knowing how much kilos they will sell to you or to X or to Z, versus that variable sometimes is much more of a determinant factor, versus not knowing how much volume they will sell.
Very interesting. So it's about security in a certain sense.
Security, of course, yeah, security.
So knowing that the Colombian Coffee Federation guarantees the purchase of any coffee produced in Colombia, that is a certain security at a certain price, which might not be the right price. But what's your take on that?
So first of all, as many of you guys know, price is not similar in these regions. So each region has a different price. It's calculated on what the FNC certain factors behind it. I will not get into it, but so it's different in several regions. it's there where sometimes the producer says, well, yes, I can maybe get that for a price, but it's that added price that you're looking for, right? And what I think needs to be done more is what happens if you sell 100% of your coffee for that price. I honestly think that income level um, is not that high, and it's not sustainable for that cost of production. And it goes again, it's the cost of production of your farm. I'm not even getting into sustaining your household. Right. I'm not even getting.
So we need
that.
both things. We need security.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I can sell this coffee, get that amount of coffee, but also I can sell it for a certain amount, so that it actually works out on a long term.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also knowing, and it's there where I think, okay, much more of these tools that exist for us to know how to measure your water, measure your humidity, helps to determine the probability that you will be selling your coffee at a certain price. That access needs to be happening more, access to those tools. Because sometimes, as I say, sometimes it's not willingness as, being in a gamble, but it is a gamble. Gamble is a climate. The gamble is, okay, I remember this woman producer said to me, the neighbor was looking for me. I left the coffee there, took it out, and because I took it out, if I don't come back on time, and doing this other chore, I just lost track of time, and then the coffee was taken out of the water. I mean, there's so many of these stories that then something happened then with the coffee, and it was not because you constantly wanted to make it worse quality. It was simply you were so busy during the day, you left to help out a neighbor, you came back, and they're like, oh, maybe I should have done X, Y, Z.
Yeah. I mean, that's of course. It's not a production facility or a factory where every process is fully controlled and there's a person for each and every step. It's small farmers, and they do everything and much more, as you just mentioned.
Artisanal work.
Right.
Yeah, it's artisanal work. It's not a commodity.
So I remember you telling me an anecdote a little bit about how a producer telling you, or I forget who it was, why do you want this data? And it made me think of how the question of how do we humanize data, in the sense of collecting data and then using that data, obviously, like you said, to benefit the producer, giving them the access to that data, but also what other ways can we humanize that data to continue to empower producers? I mean, I'm kind of thinking out loud as I ask this question, but I don't know if that makes sense.
I think we often, what has happened is, I think over the years we have in the sector have produced some great studies using all types of data coming from coffee production. And it's just put out there, or it's being used, but we often forget how to interpret it for the producers itself. So you have the level of, for the country level, how do we use it for a strategy of country? How do we use it for a certain region? How do we use it for the producer? I think the producer is the one that's often left behind, in the sense that it's not interpreted for them. So you do need to kind of push it and simply ask, what more do you want to know? What more can I do for you with this, what we just have? And it's not intended to be a sad story. It's intended to be a motivating story. This producer, Inez, he said to me, I feel that I'm in a rat race, that I will never get out of this. And I just showed him the numbers of his of the production over the last years, of his income, cost of production, how he scored on the group level. And he said to me, I feel that I'm in a rat race. My dad and my mom come from coffee farming families. They've always dedicated their lives to it. They've never been on a holiday. They've never progressed. That's how it felt for them. So aside from fun with, and for me it was a thinking of, okay, so what can we do for you at one point that you don't feel that you're in a rat race, because nobody wants to be in that, thinking of it's every time the same, because I'm always on my farm. I'm never, I'm always there. It's always the same. It's the same struggle every single time. If it's not the weather, he says, it's the prices. If it's not this, it's hard time to get the workers. There's always an issue. And the moment when he said that, I was like, okay, so like let us again look at your numbers for inputs, let again for labor. Is there something that you can create or do by asking and by having a conversation that maybe it's something that we're overlooking or not seeing? That for me is the important value, that you do need to take, as you just said, producing coffee is very handmade. It's tailored in a sense, which means that sometimes the feedback needs to be tailored. We're often looking for economies of scale. We're often looking for solutions that work for all, to just that implement a solution and then we're done. Yeah, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think it's more of a regional solution. I think it's more of thinking what could work for them, and that they also, feel involved with it on getting forward. I do think that price is a good start to work with that, because there is so much what you can do on farm. You have to do something with the risk they're taking on the farm, and then there's price.
Yeah, and I think I like that personalization of the supply chain in the end of the day, of making more direct connections, direct trade. The stock price ultimately is an average. It's just, as you said, and an orientation point based of thousands and thousands of contracts. So it's nothing personalized. It's an orientation point, and I think that's a very interesting thing, because we have worked so many, almost centuries now, to industrialization, standardizing products, destructing certain structures and recombining things to make it more efficient, right? And now we learn that our food is better if it's raw, or if it's more natural. Our relationships are better if they are in person, potentially. And there's all of this learnings, and at the same time we also have a lot of benefits from the industrialization, from scaling, and mixing that. So to me, this is a very interesting question for technology. Where can technology be part of the solution and help overcome certain gaps and be the bridge? And where is technology just there to unify everything, and the important details get lost? So we need to be making sure that they're not getting lost.
Yeah, and I think it's is it time consuming? Yes. But I think that you can extract so much value for them. And when you forget how much time it is for one, just don't focus on that. When I remember when my colleague Carolina, I said, okay, so what we're going to do is going to share the general insights in the morning, and then we start doing this one-to-one meetings. And so as she said, one-to-one meetings? I said, yes. I said, like, that's going to take us all day. And I was like, yeah, I know. As one-to-one meetings, maximum 30 minutes. Let's aim for 20. And they appreciated it so much, because you're sitting with them, going through it, having a conversation, and for some it took longer than 30 minutes, but that's fine. And it is okay. It's the thing that the extra insight into making this for them also a viable product, that for me is key. And that they ask me questions about what they are seeing. I think that was for me the biggest learning lesson in this again, and that never stops. And when you say that personalization, yes, that can be. It's not easy, but it's I think it will mark a difference for them, definitely.
Yeah, to me, that's the reason for specialty coffee in general, for setting a product apart, taking some extra time, figuring out those intrinsic and specific qualities, and not just talking about coffee, because that would be too general. And it really stuck with me. It's like, how do I personally process that, knowing that there's 4 different prices within Colombia, and there's probably 20 different prices really for the same category of product, which is coffee, but it's not the same coffee. And wrapping our heads around that, certain things can cost different, even if they appear to be maybe the same, but they're not. And I think that's very important on a global scale. If you buy something locally, if I buy a local beer, or if I buy a locally made product, well, it has a different price, and everybody has then to decide: is it worth it to me? Is it something special, or am I choosing the mass production product, which is just cheaper, and I lose all the details, but maybe it's fine too. Super interesting.
But that basically is what Nick was also saying, right? It's like, how do you humanize that more? And I think that in part of that humanization of is not only comes within the relationship or a WhatsApp call or whatever. It's also taking the time to understand, okay, what can I do for you more? That for me, in terms of technology, would love to see our collaboration, for example, flourish for the benefit of the producer, right? That would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, for me, like, I don't know, it seems kind of obvious to us now, but a few months ago, I spoke to a producer in El Salvador, and he told me, I asked him, like, what are some of the most important things you care about when selling your coffee to a buyer? And he said, yeah, the price, but he was very simple about it and said, I really just want them to visit me. Like, I want them to like come and see my farm, and like, you could tell that producer wants a relationship. And I think that's the case for a lot of producers. They want to be able to have that like closeness and with people who are buying, not just enjoying the coffee, but buying their coffee. And that does go back to what you're working on is, a part of that, sharing what you're learning, sharing, the data you're finding, and as part of like building that overarching relationship with the producer, which is massively important for sure.
That's the same experience car factories had 20 years ago, where they had split up the tasks to the minimum task possible, so that one person would put in one specific screw, and that's it. And then they had 1,000 people doing 1,000 different things, but they were not connected. And the products got worse because nobody connected to the product. There was no pride in it. There was no sense of, I'm part of something, I'm creating something. I don't even know what my screw is doing in the end of the day, right? I'm just putting it in, and then further down the line, there's a car, but this is not my car. And they learned that the hard way. So they restructured the factories in a way that one person would actually accompany the process through different stages. And the results on quality, the results on identification, churn of employees, satisfaction, output, everything improved. And that's a more like industrial world example, but I think it's the same for farmers. You just want to be seen. Everybody wants to be seen, right? I'm doing hard work. I try my best, and I want someone to tell me, you do a great job. I like what you do. This is amazing. I see what's going on, right? It's a very fundamental human desire.
Again, human factors that come into play, and I'm all for making life easier, but I'm also very much aware that those pieces are very important in order to maintain a supply chain, and I think that sometimes we overlook. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vera. That was absolutely special, some of the information and stories you shared with us. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Vera.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast brought to you by Cropster. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe or give us a follow on any of our channels to always get the latest episode. If you're interested in more educational content on all things coffee and tech, be sure to head to cropster.com/learn or visit our YouTube channel. Cheers to more coffee.